You're listening to a sermon from Doxa Church. In this, the third installation of our Gospel of John series, we'll take a look at the upside-down nature of our Messiah.
Have you ever had a lingering something in your life, like a lingering sin in your life, something that you've wanted to get rid of in your life? Some sin, something that you've been doing, and you've been trying to get rid of it, and you're working really hard, but you just can't. Maybe you're thinking of something you used to do or some action you used to think that you were trying to get rid of, and it took you years to be able to solve that problem. That's where Peter's story and our story intersects. Our stories meet together there because despite our best intentions, Peter has good intentions, we fall short because of a sinful heart. We do this and so does Peter. Peter has the best of intentions to follow Jesus, and yet he still cannot accomplish his goal of following Jesus to where he's gonna go. He can't do it. And Peter has a ton of confidence. I mean, where do you get the confidence to fail so miserably? I have no idea where you get the confidence to fail so miserably. I mean, this is crazy. Where could it come from? Well, I think it actually comes from one of two places. And sadly for us, I think we draw from the same two places. Okay? The first place the overconfidence to follow God came from for Peter was an overestimation of his abilities. And we draw from the same place, an overestimation of our abilities. See, Peter at face value thought he could follow Jesus faithfully, right? He thought he could sort of follow God wherever he would take him, right? And he underestimated his sinful and broken nature in his own heart. He actually didn't see it. He failed. You know, I was a pastor in San Francisco. I don't know if you know that, if you're new. I was a pastor in San Francisco. And if you know anything about San Francisco, you know it's kind of a weird place, right? Right, you've seen the news stories, all that's true. It's got some beauty, but it's true. It's crazy. Well, I planted a church there, okay, which in retrospect, kind of crazy, right? That's what God does. He calls us to crazy stuff. That's what he does. And I planted a church there. And one of the things I noticed when pastoring in San Francisco is that the cultural context is incredibly strong. The city itself has a really profound gravitational pull towards it. Like it yanks you to it. So churches or church plants or people, they come in with a specific sort of theological perspective, let's call it, and within a few years, there's a domino effect. There's a domino effect of walking back theology and values that soon ends, not kidding you, in full-blown heresy or even walking away from Christianity. The gravitational pull in that city is so strong that people come in believing one thing and they end up looking a lot like San Francisco. That's what happens. It's true there. There was one large church in San Francisco. It was planted by a church called Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City. For those of you that are extra Christian, you know that Tim Keller, the Yoda sort of Christianity, that was his church. So this church is planted out of a sort of one of the strongholds of Christianity in the U.S. in the West. And that church goes to San Francisco, and it just absolutely does well. It explodes. It does amazing work. Like people are coming to know Jesus. It's Presbyterian, and so it's more formal, but people love the liturgy, all this great stuff. Well, again, you're in San Francisco long enough, and things go south. This church took all of 10 years to begin walking back its theological positions, from caving on what they know the Bible has taught them to essentially what has become a full-blown non-Christian church, a non-heresy church. And that's what's happened over a decade. And it goes from the most influential church in the city, and it was about 1,000 people, which in San Francisco is by and far the largest church, or at the time it was. And that's saying something for a large city. And it left a crater in the spiritual scene. We're talking people bled out in that church. There were people that are walking away from their faith. There were people that were questioning their Christianity. There were people that left the church altogether, and the sort of vacuum of Christianity in San Francisco was felt. And it was hard for the church to ever regain a foothold there for a very long time. Now, it's not just theology that sort of causes us to fall away. Sometimes it's like the financial or the power or the sexual dynamics of a place or people. Sometimes it's those sort of things, right? It's not always just like theology, okay? But then I started thinking, like, if this could happen in San Francisco, like, where else could it happen? Because, like, has it happened other places? Is the pattern true for other places? And I started thinking, and I was like, yes, there is a pattern for it. I can't remember. Like, has Seattle had any large churches succumb to the gravitational pull of sin, leaving a spiritual vacuum in the city? A couple. And the church is still recovering from it. It's still recovering from it. People are broken. People have walked away from Jesus. It happens all over the place. So it's not just San Francisco, it's Seattle. But it's not just cities, it's true for churches. And it's not just churches, it's people. People like us. Our sinful nature is like the gravity on our souls, keeping us anchored to the planet of sin and folly. And many of us have learned, and others we will learn, that our well-intentioned abilities only get us so far. Now, the second reason for our and for Peter's overconfidence of following God comes from, so we have the overestimation of our abilities, and the next one, an underestimation of what it means to actually follow God. So Jesus tells Peter, that he will essentially fail in following him, which is hard to swallow. I get that. So Peter is his closest friend, and he's with Jesus, and he doesn't understand in that moment the weight of what it meant to follow Jesus. Do you understand the weight of what it means to follow Jesus? Do you get it? Do you understand that if you just read your Bible and go to a church gathering, then everything will be great? Do you understand that? Is that your gospel? I think we all have a lot of work to do in this area. I think that if Peter underestimated what it took to follow God, that we might as well. And if you're curious, let's just look at how his denial goes down, because it's actually a really tragic story how it happens, okay? Let's look at this. I'll read it for you. Now, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you mean." And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This is the man. This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again, he denied it with an oath this time. "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up to him and said to Peter, "Certainly, you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and he wept bitterly. That is a sad, heartbreaking betrayal and denial of a friend. You know what I think is weird about this story, though? I think is weird about this story is that Peter's overconfidence in his public declaration of Jesus was really his strength. If you look at Peter's story throughout the Gospels, he is, like I said, boneheaded because he won't stop talking. He talks too much. He's overzealous. He gets in people's faces. Him being overconfident and publicly declaring that Jesus is his Lord, those are his strengths. If you recall, we haven't gone through it yet, but when Jesus comes to get captive and Judas leads the guards to Jesus to get him, and they're pulling Jesus out, Peter's not going out like that. Peter reaches for his sword and is, "I'm about that life. Like, you're not taking my Lord." And he goes for the head. He gets an ear, but he goes for that. Like, he is not afraid. This guy he is not a soft, mushy individual, okay? Quite the opposite, too much the opposite, okay? That's Peter's story. Of course, Jesus heals the guy's ear. He's like, "I'm sorry about that, sir. Here's your ear back." That's pretty wild. No one talks about that miracle a lot often. It's a crazy story. He's a tough guy. He's also a natural extrovert and clearly a naturally brave man. Yet in the sight, and this is what's wild about this, in the sight of an accusation by a little girl in a sparse crowd, he is shocked and strained into denying his Lord. So 50 guards show up. "I'm about that life. I'm pulling a sword. You're not taking Jesus." A little girl in a crowd, and he denies him not once, not twice, but 3 times. Like, that's once, shame on you, right? Twice, shame on me. What about 3 times? 3 times. He failed in his strength. Question for you. What is your greatest strength? What is your greatest strength? Are you a great speaker? Are you a great speaker like Patrick up here? Eloquent speaker? Are you a great teacher, a preacher? Are you a wonderful prayer? Do you just pray and everyone feels the Holy Spirit when you pray? Are you incredibly friendly or hospitable? Are you an evangelist? Do people come to know Jesus around you? Are you a musician? Do you sing amazingly? Do you play an instrument beautifully? Are you great with kids? What are you? What is your strength? Think about it for a second. Because God can use all of our strengths, but if we suppose we can follow God because of our strengths, then we'd be sadly mistaken. Such is the tragic stories of spiritual vacuums in large cities. It's not the only variable. Our greatest human strengths, no matter how strong they are or what they are never adequate for following Christ in and of themselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? Peter, in his story, he's got a lot of strength. He's got a lot of bravado. He's got a lot of oomph, right? He's got it all. Peter, in that moment, learned how limited of a man he really is. I just don't have it in some places.
For more information about Doxa or to join us for a Sunday gathering, go to doxa-church.com.